Canada's counterattack against American tariffs this Thursday night.
If the United States no longer wants to lead, Canada will.
How Canada is pushing back, the market's meltdown, and fears the U.S. is falling into recession. One automaker hits the brakes on production, the message it sends, plus how goods like phones are going to get pricier. Neighborhoods obliterated.
That's huge.
The intense storms that barreled through parts of the U.S. And the ultimate high note. The second Canadian ever to win the prestigious Polar Music Prize.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The world is digesting the American president's escalating trade war. Donald Trump has imposed taxes on imports to the U.S. from countries around the world, including allies. He calls it payback for unfair trade practices. And while he didn't add new tariffs on Canada, the ones Trump already announced on steel, aluminum and autos are in effect. Today, Canada's Prime Minister said he will match them.
So while it's progress that further tariffs were not imposed on Canada yesterday, the President's actions will reverberate here in Canada and across the world. While this is a tragedy, it is also the new reality. We must respond with both purpose and force.
Our coverage begins with Mackenzie Gray.
After reading the fine print on Trump's tariffs, the Prime Minister promised to chart a new path forward for Canada.
We believe in the free and open exchange of goods, services, and ideas. And if the United States no longer wants to lead, Canada will.
That leadership starts with further pushback against the U.S., with Mark Carney announcing Canada's putting a 25% retaliatory tariff on all vehicles made in the U.S. that do not comply with a Canada-U.S. free trade deal. That's roughly 10% of all American car imports, part of a fundamental overhaul of Canada-U.S. trade.
Our old relationship of steadily deepening integration with the United States is over.
There's no date for when the Canadian auto response will come into force, but when it does, it will complement other Canadian counter-tariffs, including $30 billion from the first round of tariffs and $29.8 billion from steel and aluminum. The Trudeau government's promised $125 billion tariff response was scrapped by Carney after Canada didn't get hit with reciprocal tariffs.
Congratulate him on what appears to be a de-escalation for now with the president.
Carney and the Premier spoke early Thursday morning prior to the latest tariff announcement.
We all agreed that we got the best of a bad deal, which in my opinion is still totally unacceptable.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith first called the tariff situation an important win for Canada and Alberta on Wednesday, but Thursday she softened her tone.
I don't want to be exuberant about dodging the bullet because we have our friends who are heavily invested obviously in steel and aluminum and the auto sector who are going to be hurt.
Despite the latest tariffs, ignoring free trade deals and the president constantly insulting our country, Carney still believes the Americans are partners with Canada.
The U.S. is absolutely our ally. It's our ally in security and defense partnerships. It's our most important security ally.
Carney warned there are likely more tariffs to come, Donna, saying the U.S. is expected to hit Canadian lumber and pharmaceuticals.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Montreal tonight. Thanks. Mark Carney says Trump's measures will rupture the global economy, and there is lots of anxiety among investors. In North America, the Dow Jones, the Nasdaq, the S&P TSX Composite Index all closed down. Stocks plummeted, losing roughly $3.1 trillion in value today, the largest decline since March of 2020. A lot of things will get more expensive, too, like iPhones. They could retail for more than $3,200. Our senior business correspondent, Ann Gaviola, explains the volatility.
On the day he dubbed Liberation Day, President Trump called on retired Michigan auto worker Brian Panebecker to preach the virtues of tariffs.
He understands this business a lot better than the economists, a lot better than anybody.
Donald Trump's policies are going to bring product back into those underutilized plants.
But despite the endorsement, markets sold off.
Even with Canada dodging the worst of the tariffs, there certainly is going to be broader economic pain to come.
Indeed, economists see an escalating global trade war as a losing proposition.
the idea that this is just going to raise a lot of money, it's not clear how that happens without it being at the cost of the U.S. consumer and some producers as well. Prices are going to go up for everybody. There will be job losses.
On social media, Trump's former vice president, Mike Pence, called the tariffs the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history, expected to cost American families more than $3,500 a year. A tax hike and trade war no one asked for.
European Union does not want any trade war. We support World Trade Organization. We support multilateralism.
Retaliation, perhaps politically necessary, will take an economic toll too. Multinational stocks that manufacture in Asia bearing the brunt of the day one sell-off. Nike, Dollar Tree, Lululemon, Apple, all in the red.
Reacting in ways that we haven't really seen since those first COVID lockdowns. That's the extent of panic that we're seeing among investors.
Investors are piling into so-called safe haven assets like gold and bonds. The price of 5-year Government of Canada bonds climbing while yields are depressed. Now, those yields are what fixed mortgage rates are based on.
They dropped this morning to a low that we actually haven't seen since April 2022.
A reflection of markets bracing for more financial pain. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Thousands of Canadian workers are already taking a hit. The automaker Stellantis is pausing production at 2 assembly plants in Canada and Mexico. It's also laying off hundreds of U.S. employees. The company says it needs time to review its options in the face of Trump's tariffs. Jeff Semple is in Windsor, Ontario, where many employees got layoff notices today.
Derek Gungle has worked at Windsor's Stellantis auto plant for more than a decade, showing up Thursday afternoon for what could be one of his last shifts.
How are you feeling today, man?
Nervous, very nervous. I mean, the future is really unknown.
Starting Monday, Gungle and his 3,500 colleagues will be sitting at home, this auto plant closing for at least 2 weeks. Stellantis, the conglomerate that owns Chrysler, Dodge, Fiat, and Jeep, is also laying off 900 employees in the U.S. and pausing production in Mexico. The company's given reason, President Trump's tariffs.
This is like a man-made disaster.
All completed vehicles imported into the U.S. are now being hit with a 25% tariff, except those from Canada and Mexico. Starting next month, they'll be tariffed based on their percentage of American parts.
So, for instance, if a vehicle has, say, 50% American content by value, then the remaining 50% would be tariffed.
As you saw yesterday, it's about as clear as mud.
Concern and confusion abounds at this 50-year-old mold parts distributor.
This order, for instance, is going to El Paso, Texas today.
Nearly half of its customers are south of the border.
Things were looking really great. The economy was turning around for manufacturing, and then all of a sudden, this tariff uncertainty has caused havoc.
The tariffs pose an existential threat to Canada's Motor City, linked to the U.S. by North America's busiest commercial border crossing.
What we'll see in the Windsor assembly plant, in mining terms, is a dead canary. We're going to see a whole bunch of slowdowns or stoppages on both sides of the border.
Even before the tariffs, Stellantis had been struggling with sluggish sales and excess inventory. So far, the other major automakers haven't announced any cuts. In fact, GM is planning to increase pickup truck production at a plant in Indiana. Donna?
Jeff Semple in Windsor, Ontario. Thanks.
Reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
Well, Trump makes it too simple, say economists. They point out the U.S. calculation is based on trade imbalances, not tariffs. A trade deficit happens when a country buys or imports more products from another country than it sells or exports. Take China. The U.S. imports $440 billion worth of goods from China and has a $295 billion trade deficit. 295 divided by 440 gives you 67%.
So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset?
Well, plenty of countries are upset and consider it punitive. China calls it bullying. We'll have more international reaction in a little later. But first, Jackson Prosco looks at the damage this could do to the American economy.
For all the tariff panic on Wall Street, the White House and President Donald Trump remain unmoved.
The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
But fear of a recession echoes through the halls of Congress.
Do you think there's actually a strategy behind this?
No. As American lawmakers face a grim reality that the president's gamble may have inflicted historic damage on his own economy.
He is going to use the tariffs in order for every company in every industry to have to come to him, kiss the ring, bend the knee, pledge loyalty in order to get relief.
Economists warn the unintended consequences of tariffs risk becoming a contagion that spreads out of control.
As businesses and consumers pause, we could get a self-fulfilling slowdown. We even could eventually get a recession if businesses in particular feel they can't make investment decisions.
Yet many of Trump's Republican allies are willing to defend the tariffs as a win, at least for now.
What this is going to do is tell countries all around the world, stop taking advantage of American companies. So we're going to get more American jobs. We're going to get better paying jobs. So I'm excited about it.
The universal nature of the duties has left no wiggle room for American consumers. They now face increased costs on every single good imported into the country with no workarounds. Reassurance is in short supply.
What about products that you simply cannot produce in the United States? Coffee, bananas?
Well, there's plenty of products that we can produce.
Sure, there's going to be some short-term movement, but this is a reordering of global trade. It's time for America to manufacture again.
Whether Trump can manufacture support for his trade gambit remains another matter as he tests the pain threshold of American consumers and businesses. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In Canada, the federal election is just over 3 weeks away, and on the campaign trail, Trump's trade war is impossible to ignore. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is promising more tax cuts and support for workers laid off because of tariffs. David Aiken caught up with the Conservative campaign in Ontario. David.
Well, Donna, Pierre Poilievre has an idea to help the Canadian auto sector cut the GST on Canadian-made cars.
We need to protect auto workers.
He didn't explain what might qualify as a Canadian-made car, but Poilievre did provide more details on his plan to help Canadian workers at risk in a tariff war. He would create a $3 billion Keeping Canadians Working Fund.
We will use the money to lend to companies who are desperate to keep employees on the payroll throughout this period of uncertainty.
On another matter, Poilievre brushed aside the fact that the Conservative Party has had to fire an unprecedented 4 candidates in just the last 2 days, fired mostly for expressing inappropriate views on social media or in podcasts.
Our vetting process is stronger than all the other parties. That's why we have a zero tolerance for anyone who acts unacceptably.
Brushfires like that aside, Pierre Poilievre has been focusing heavily on looking for votes among working people. On just about every day of this campaign so far, Poilievre has been on a shop floor, on a construction site, here today at this steel mill, and he's trying to make the case that he, not Mark Carney, not Jagmeet Singh, is the real champion of the blue-collar, middle-income voter. Donna.
All right, David Aiken, thank you. The NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is proposing using victory bonds to help Canada's economy in the trade war, similar to a measure used to fund Canada's war efforts during the First and Second World Wars.
Canadians do want to do their part, and this is a way for Canadians to contribute. And we saw it when there's a need, like during the war. The Canadians invested massively in victory bonds. We are in a similar situation with a trade war, with the threats of Donald Trump.
If the NDP forms government, Singh says the bonds would be available in 5- and 10-year terms with compounding interest at 3.5%. They would be tax-free if held to maturity. The revenue raised would be dedicated to funding public infrastructure, including housing, transit, and water systems. 2 organizers of the so-called Freedom Convoy in Canada have been found guilty of mischief. Tamara Leach and Chris Barber were instrumental in organizing demonstrations in Ottawa against federal COVID-19 mandates in 2022. The judge said the 2 routinely encouraged people to participate, even though they knew the protests were affecting residents and businesses. Barber and Leach were also found not guilty of multiple charges relating to intimidation and obstructing police. The world reverberates from Trump's new tariffs coming up, what it means for the garment industry, and what country could actually benefit. President Trump has certainly got the whole world's attention. A number of countries are promising to hit back against his import taxes. Others are waiting, considering their options. Global trade is deeply interconnected, and though Trump seems to believe this will incentivize industries to move their production to the U.S., it will certainly drive up the costs of goods. As Redmond Shannon reports, there are few economies that won't feel the effects.
The China-U.S. trade relationship is worth more than $500 billion a year. China's foreign ministry promised a response to Trump's tariffs, saying Washington has broken World Trade Organization rules by slapping a rate of 54% on its exports.
Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years.
Many of the countries Donald Trump is hitting hardest for what he calls a rip-off are in Southeast Asia. Garment factories like this one in Cambodia. Using cheap labour, they export huge volumes of clothing to the US, resulting in those trade deficits Trump wants eliminated. I worry that the tariffs will cause the factories to shut down, says this woman.
It will end up with much higher inflation for the US consumer.
This economist says the US will still have to import items like fast fashion, and there could be other consequences too.
These countries will gravitate more towards China in the future.
We are prepared to respond. We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures.
Hit with a 20% tariff, the European Union is juggling tough choices as it balances the needs of its 27 members. And here in Britain, the government has released a list of thousands of US products that it says it is considering for tariffs, ranging from live rabbits to firearms. Donna?
Okay, Redmond Shannon in London, thanks. Among the more than 100 countries Trump is targeting are some tiny islands. One is a small volcanic island in the Arctic Ocean that's home to a Norwegian whaling station, and there are others in the Pacific. Australia's Prime Minister says nowhere on Earth is safe. A group of remote, barren and uninhabited islands near Antarctica was swept up in Trump's trade war. Heard Island and McDonald Islands, a territory of Australia, had a 10% tariff imposed on them, even though the only residents are penguins and seals. Ahead, a deadly Israeli strike on a school in Gaza as Hungary rolls out the welcome mat for Israel's Prime Minister. Parts of Ontario are still cleaning up from last weekend's ice storm. More than 180,000 homes and businesses were still without power today. Ontario's Hydro One says strong winds and freezing rain yesterday slowed their efforts to restore power in some areas. In the U.S., dozens of violent storms and tornadoes left a trail of destruction from Oklahoma to Indiana. At least 7 people were killed. In Missouri, homes were destroyed, vehicles overturned, and power knocked out. This is the damage in Arkansas. And in Tennessee, there's major flooding. Crews were called out to rescue stranded motorists. The National Weather Service says people should brace for what it calls potentially historic rain over the weekend. Israel launched a new wave of attacks on southern Gaza just hours after revealing it plans to seize large parts of the Palestinian territory. Gaza's health ministry says at least 100 people were killed. Israel has vowed to establish a new security corridor between Rafah and Han Yunis to cut off Hamas, it says. Israel ended a ceasefire in March and has imposed a month-long stoppage on food, fuel, and humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu landed in Budapest today. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban made the trip possible by withdrawing Hungary from the International Criminal Court. It has issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu on allegations of war crimes in Gaza. Next, Canadian Barbara Hannigan wins the prestigious Polar Prize, how she is pushing boundaries in contemporary classical music. She has won a Grammy, 2 Junos, and received the Order of Canada. Now Nova Scotia's Barbara Hannigan has a new award, the Polar Music Prize. It's known as the Nobel Prize of Music, and Hannigan is only the second Canadian to receive it. Heidi Petracek explains how the trailblazing conductor and soprano has made her mark on classical music.
Singer, performer, conductor Barbara Hannigan is often all those all at once.
One part is absolutely in the present, and the other part is a little bit ahead.
She's already won a Grammy. Now Hannigan is among the 2025 recipients of the prestigious Polar Music Prize, joining jazz great Herbie Hancock and iconic rockers Queen, only the second Canadian to make the cut after Joni Mitchell. Now living in France, Hannigan is a long way from her small hometown of Waverley, Nova Scotia, where her love of music was sparked as a child and nurtured by her teachers.
My teacher in Nova Scotia, Sylvia MacDonald, had written a letter to Mary Morrison to say, would you listen to this girl? Mary said, I would like to teach you.
Mary Morrison has been adjunct professor at the University of Toronto for more than 40 years. Now 98, she's stayed in touch with her former pupil, and they received honorary doctorates from the U of T together in 2017.
She just feels where it's going. She seems to know instinctively what the composer wanted her to do, and she can do it.
She really built the instrument. I'm extremely grateful.
Hannigan often returns to Canada to work with symphonies and still comes home every summer.
And I take a deep breath, and I know that I'm home.
Her inspiring talent recognized around the world, distinctly Canadian-made. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
What a talent. That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Here Canada showcases Abraham Lake, Alberta, a patriotic apartment building in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and Point Amour Lighthouse in L'Anse Amour, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.